Australia. Are you satisfied with the outcome of this? And can you give us any details on the diplomatic negotiations that went ongoing between Australia, the U.S., UK, and all that? Give us any light on that.
So with respect to the first question, I'm not going to have any comment, only because under our system we have an independent Justice Department that makes its own decisions on these matters, and it's appropriate that they be the ones that speak to them and not have other departments in the United States weigh in one way or the other. That has always been the case, but of course we have confidence in our colleagues at the Justice Department to make these decisions and make them in with the full interest of the United States in mind. As it pertains to involvement of the State Department, I can tell you it was very limited. Only in the last few days, this was a matter that was handled by the Justice Department through law enforcement channels. There was some small coordination role between our embassy and the Australian government just in the past few days, but this was, other than that, a law enforcement matter handled through law enforcement channels.
But are you satisfied that the case is over?
So look, the Justice Department has spoken to that, and I don't have anything to add. Obviously, the ambassador put out a statement that said we were happy to work with our Australian colleagues on it, and that remains the case. I do think it is important when we talk about Julian Assange to remind the world that the actions for which he was indicted and for which he has now pled guilty are actions that put the lives of our partners, our allies, and our diplomats at risk, especially those who work in dangerous places like Afghanistan and Iraq. This was some years ago now, almost 15 years ago, so I think the world has forgotten much of it. But if you recall, when WikiLeaks first disseminated and published State Department documents, State Department cables, they did so without redacting names. They just threw them out there for the world to see. And so the documents they published gave identifying information of individuals who were in contact with the State Department. That included opposition leaders, human rights activists around the world, whose positions were put in some danger because of their public disclosure. It also chilled the ability of American personnel to build relationships and have frank conversations with them. And at the time, those of you who covered the State Department at the time will probably remember that in the days leading up to that release, the State Department really had to scramble to get people out of danger, to move them out of harm's way. It was an extraordinary effort performed by dozens of government officials around the world, but that doesn't change the danger that those actions put innocent people all around the world in through no fault of their own. And that's, of course, not even to mention the further actions by WikiLeaks down the road to essentially serve as a conduit for Russian intelligence interfering in the U.S. presidential election.
Sorry, Matt. So I actually did cover the State Department back then, and I don't remember there being any public, there was a public concern that was raised about the potential security risk posed to sources who might have been quoted. Was there actually any, did you ever discover anyone who was injured, killed, had to go into hiding because of them?
So a few things about that. One, I can't give you a definitive answer, only because I wasn't here at the time and so much time. And so, hold on. Matt, let me finish. I have a full answer on it. One, I can't speak to that because it was some years ago, and I don't have a full, accounting of what happened. But number two, the State Department did an extraordinary amount of work when we found out that these cables were going to be published to get people out of harm's way, to go around and look at what might become public and take action so people that would be put in danger would be put out of harm's way. But third, if you drive drunk down the street and get pulled over for drunk driving, the fact that you didn't crash into another car and kill someone doesn't get you out of the reckless actions and the endangerment that you put your fellow citizens in. And it's the same thing, the same principle applies here.
Right. Well, I don't think that it does. But the fact of the matter is that the State Department has been, at least as far as I know, and maybe I'm wrong, but has never been able to point to anyone who was compromised or killed or put at risk because of this.
Their identities were compromised. The State Department went to great work to get people out of harm's way, to prevent that very action from happening.
Do you know how many people about?
As I said, this was some time ago. I was in the government at the time, not at the State Department. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I do know that there was work around the world, especially in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places around the world where they did have to do a great amount of work to kind of move people out of harm's way.
One of your predecessors, P.J. Crowley, who was standing at the podium at the time, went to great pains to talk about the potential damage that could or would be caused by these revelations. And unless I missed it, I didn't hear that there was any.
As I said, number one, the department went to a great amount of effort to avoid people being put in harm's way, but it doesn't absolve anyone of their responsibility. I know, but I know you're not, but it's an important point. Just because people were able to mitigate the harm done by your actions, that doesn't absolve you of your actions in the first place.
Okay.
Shannon, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
You said there was some small coordination between the U.S. and Australia over the last couple of days. Was that involving the
Just
flight?
with relation to his landing and transfer in Australia. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up? It said in the
Sure.
agreement that Mr. Assange will not be able to enter the United States without permission. Who will he be seeking permission from? Who would grant that permission, and how would that happen if that were to occur?
It would, so I'm not going to speak to provisions in what was a Justice Department plea agreement, but that would be handled, as is the case for anyone seeking permission to enter the United States.
And in the judgment, the sentencing part of the judgment, the judge noted that there were no victims of Mr. Assange's behaviour, which is part of the reason that the sentence was what it was. Do you disagree with that? Do you think there were victims of his actions?
I'm not going to speak to a comment made by a judge in a ruling. It would never be appropriate for me to do so, but I stand by the comments I made just a moment ago.
What? You're not going to speak to a comment made by a judge. I mean, if he did, I don't know that he did, but that's exactly the point of my question.
Yeah, but I'm
Questions
not.
earlier, which is that the State Department has never come up, even though it was one of the prime quote unquote victims of these leaks, was never able to identify anyone who was killed or came under.
I think the point I made a moment ago is an appropriate response to that, which is just because the State Department was able to take actions to keep people out of harm's way, people that he put in harm's way, doesn't absolve a responsibility.
What actions did the State Department take?
The State Department at the time was able to reach out to individuals whose names were going to be, I can't tell you that, it's almost 15 years ago, Matt, I wasn't here. But I know, but I can
tell. Just come to a close.
But I cannot give you a full account of something that happened almost 15 years ago, but people that were here will tell you that the State Department went to great lengths to reach out to people whose identities were exposed and get them out of harm's way. And the other point I made is that it does, when something like that happens, it does chill the ability of American personnel to build relationships with people and count on the fact that the information they provide us will be held confidential. So it is not just a harm to, or potential harm to the safety and security of those individuals. It's a harm to American diplomacy.
No doubt, but the fact of the matter is that you have not ever been able to identify anything tangible about any tangible negative effect.
That is a different. So I think I just did point to a tangible negative effect when people are less willing to trust the United States government to keep information secret.
Who was willing to?
It was I was in government at the time, and I can tell you, traveling the world with a different a different agency, we often heard from foreign counterparts that they were. I'm obviously not going to speak to. I'm not going to speak to the exact conversations, but we often heard from foreign counterparts that they were worried about providing information to the United States government because of our ability to keep it secret.
I remember one, having been here at the time, and I remember that Berlusconi told former Secretary Clinton that he was concerned, mainly because of what the WikiLeaks, what the cables suggested about his, activities. And,
there were more substantive and serious concerns. Yeah.
Were there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you name
I'm
not a person?
So
a country?
I think you could see why, if the point of the conversation is someone raising concern about private conversations being made public, it wouldn't be helpful for me to then make those private conversations public in response to a question at this
15
podium.
years ago. I'll drop it.
Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you. A couple of questions on Russia.
Yeah.
The multiple reports claiming that Russian government